My wife and I consider the privilege to be with you folks in Aspen. What a beautiful place you have. My, my. It's a great privilege to be out of the city of New York, to be able to come here among the mountains and see greenery and be among such beautiful people. We bring with us the love and greetings of the governing body and the Brooklyn Bethel family. And I'd venture to say there are at least 3,000 brothers in Bethel that would exchange places with me right now if it were possible. And I never knew that so many brothers knew that I was coming to Aspen. You've got a lot of connections over there in Brooklyn, and it's good to know that. But Jehovah's people are very closely united, and we're attached to one another, and it's good to see the harmony that is between all of us. I would also like to bring to you the love and greetings of our congregation. You have one here in Aspen. We have a congregation in the Brooklyn Stuyvesant Center, and that's in the ghetto of Brooklyn. It's sort of a no man's land. And we have a congregation of 77 cards in the file. We have 18 full-time pioneers, regular pioneers, 10 auxiliary pioneers. We have 8 elders, and about the same amount ministerial servants. We have 17 square blocks that we work as our territory. About half of those blocks are bombed out, shelled out, burned out. You name it, that's what they are. And we have on this property business. We have a huge Olympic swimming pool. Why they ever built a swimming pool there, I never know, but maybe they wanted to get rid of some of the children that way. The fact of the matter is, it's there. And our pioneers work that territory every day. And we come along on the weekends and we work that territory every weekend. So every day of the week, we go over our territory. And we still find people of interest. People still come into the Kingdom Hall, and we still place literature. So my little congregation and the 3,000 brothers at Bethel send you their love. Find out how these things work. Now, for years, you brothers have been talking about having a need for having a Kingdom Hall here. Now you have one. And the time has come to dedicate this hall to the glory of God. We should bear in mind that our dedications, Christian dedications, are acceptable sacrifices to Jehovah. They are literally gifts to God. Now, in the Bible book of Luke, if you have your Bibles with you, you may want to look up chapter 21, and there we see Jesus standing in the temple of Jerusalem. Very seldom do you see Jesus standing. But this is one place where we do see Jesus standing. And beginning there with verse 1, you read there, "Now as he looked up, he saw the rich dropping their gifts into the treasury chest, and he saw a certain needy widow drop 2 small coins of very little value there. And he said, I tell you truthfully, this widow, although poor, dropped in more than they all did. For all these dropped in gifts out of their surplus, but this woman, out of her want, dropped in all the means of living she had." Now this was a remarkable observation on Jesus' part. The widow gave all of her want, all the means of living that she had. She made a great sacrifice to God. Others gave out of their surplus. And we, 2,000 years later, are still talking about the things that this little widow woman had done. And because we find it hard ourselves to make such sacrifices, or even similar sacrifices, We do not mind giving out of our surpluses, but out of our want is another story. So we're going to talk about that this evening. King David understood the principle of giving to Jehovah, and he knew that our giving to Jehovah represents a serious part of our worship to him, because giving or making of a sacrifice reveals our heart condition, our motives, and the way we feel about our God. It highlights or underscores our relationship with God. Now, you may want to open your Bible to 2 Samuel chapter 24, verses 24 to 25. And together let us read the closing verses of this book, 2 Samuel. However, the king, this has reference to King David, said to Araunah, "No, but without fail I shall buy it for you for a price, and I shall not offer to Jehovah my God burnt sacrifices without cost." Now the Bible in Living English says, "No, I will buy it of you at a price, and not offer my God Jehovah burnt offerings that cost me nothing." Now the lesson here is that sacrifices are gifts offered to Jehovah. And these verses tell us plainly that sacrifices that cost us nothing should not in reality be offered to God, because they are not indeed sacrifices, since they did not cost us anything. For a sacrifice to be meaningful to Jehovah, it must first of all mean something to us. It must have worth or value to us. We ourselves must recognize what we are giving is a sacrifice. Therefore, we can appreciate why Jesus took note of the widow's sacrifice, her dropping down her 2 little coins. But it was all that she had. It was a large gift to God. She gave out of her want, not out of her surplus. So our first lesson tonight is this: sacrifices to God must have worth or value. They must cost us something. Some people don't mind giving out of their surplus, but not so much out of their want. Out of their want of time, out of their want of energy, out of their belongings, out of their finances. As long as it's surplus, it is all right, but not when it's out of the want. Our second lesson is that we should not overstate the value of our earthly possessions or wealth, and be fearful of offering what we have for the furtherance of pure worship. Nor is it wise for us to put confidence in our wealth or possessions, for this is what the children of this system of things do. They trust in their possessions, in their armies or navies, in their own accomplishments, in the very size of their populations. We should not be awed by what we see, as if these things were critical life, because they're not. They mean very little, in fact, and to God they mean even less. And Jesus underscored this when he says to us, life does not come by the things that we possess. King David knew this, and as marvelous of a man that he was, he still fell into the trap of relating physical numbers to strength. He overestimated the value of his possessions. It resulted in his sitting before Jehovah. He was attracted and enticed by the physical, and David, beautiful as a spiritual man that he was, he still was a very physical man. Now, the ancient Israelites believed that it was a sin for them to number the children of Israel. They were not to take a census of their population. Jehovah commanded them that they not do this. And since all of God's commandments are a revelation of his love, this commandment was for the good of Israel. It was meant to protect them from putting their faith and trust in men. Numbers may artificially stimulate confidence or be viewed as strength, or the very strength of a nation, but the strength of Israel was to be in its God, Jehovah. Nations of this system of things have the bad habit of numbering their people. From time to time they take census. They number their armies. They rely on the military might for their protection. The size of their armies gives them a sense of pride and strength. You will have noticed on the May Day in the Soviet Union, they bring out all of their armaments, or some of them at least, and they parade before the people, and the people hail their soldiers, these big weaponries of war. They do the same here in the States, too, and when Reagan visited the Soviet Union recently, you find huge parades of armies before these people to impress the people of their strength. They parade their soldiers, their tanks, their weapons of war as if these were their salvation. King David should have known better. Now in the book of Psalm, 146th Psalm, David wrote this, as verse 5. First he says, don't put your trust in nobles, nor in the son of earthly men, to whom no salvation belongs. First of all, he tells us not to put trust in men. And this is a great stumbling block, even among theocratic people, because they look to certain personalities and people as if these are the ones that could lead them out of darkness into a better light or to a better future. In Psalm 146:5, happy is the one who has God of Jacob for his help, whose hope is in Jehovah. Psalm 33:16-22, David wrote, there is no king save by the abundance of military force. A military man himself is not delivered by the abundance of power. The horse is a deception for salvation, and by the abundance of his vital energy, it does not afford escape. Look, the eye of Jehovah is toward those fearing him, for in his holy name we have put our trust. Let your loving kindness, O Jehovah, prove to be upon us, even as we have kept waiting for you. As beautiful as these words are, they were written by David. David yet somehow did not follow them. He wrote them. He didn't even take his own advice. Not to trust in horses, not to trust in armaments, in the strength of his people, but in his God Jehovah. Now this is our second lesson for us tonight. It teaches us to trust in Jehovah with all our heart and not to lean to our own understanding, but in all our ways to acknowledge him, and he will direct our path. That's Proverbs 3:5 and 6. Verse 7 says, be not wise in your own eyes, but fear Jehovah and depart from that which is bad. It's a costly sin for us not to keep the commandments of God. The commandments of God reflect God's love. Yes, to love God is for us to keep his commandments. Now, in the moment of weakness, David ignored Jehovah's commandment and demanded that the children of Israel be numbered. His advisors, Joab particularly, advised him not to number the children of Israel. Joab was his military general. And lo and behold, he was a mighty man. Joab was rather mean as men go. But he was the head of the army, and he went to David and he said, David, don't do this, because this is against the commandment of Jehovah. But David commanded him to go and number the children anyway. Joab went, but Joab violated the king's commandment because he refused to number the Levites. He would number the children of Israel, but not the Levites. He said no, he would not go that far, even in the carrying out of the king's command. Now, for that reason, Jehovah punished the nation of Israel. He punished them severely. The nation bore the responsibility of the king's blunder. Why should that be? It was because they had asked for a king. Now they must pay for his mistakes. It was a community responsibility here. They wanted a king. Jehovah told them, yes, you can have a king, but the king would lead you astray, and you'll have to carry the responsibility of his mistakes. And here's one of the cases. God gave David a choice. He could have 3 years of famine in the land of Israel, 3 months of flight before his enemies, or 3 days of pestilence in the land. This was no easy decision for David to make. In 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 14, we see David reflecting upon what God had told him here. And David says, it is very distressing to me. Yes, it's distressing how to make a decision in a case like this. Then he says, let me fall, please, into the hand of Jehovah, for many are the mercies, his mercies, but into the hand of man do not let us fall. So our fourth lesson here is, David chose God when the going was rough. He referred to Jehovah to chastise him rather than man. Many are the mercies of Jehovah. And the lesson is this: when and if someday we should fail, even as David did, we should have the good sense to choose God when there's a decision to be made. That we should put our trust in Jehovah's mercies, for they are everlasting. We may have to pay for our mistakes, but trusting in men is far more costly than trusting in God. Can we learn this lesson from David's experience? A pestilence fell upon the nation of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, and 70,000 people died. Finally, Jehovah stopped the pestilence at the threshing floor of the Jebusite by the name of Araunah. Jehovah commanded David to set up an altar there on the very spot where the pestilence had halted. David was to offer burnt offerings on that very spot. He was to build an altar first, and then burnt offerings were to be offered, peace offerings and communion offerings. David was now begging Jehovah that he might get back in his favor. Just like all of us, if we ever fail, there comes a time that we get on our knees, or at least we should, and we should be pleading with our God to forgive us, to bring us back into his favor, that we might have an honorable relationship with him, if this would be at all possible. But first, Jehovah would put David to the test to see whether he was sincere at heart, whether he honestly and sincerely would want to come back into Jehovah's favor. Now, how would Jehovah do this? By seeing if David would do all things that Jehovah now would command him to do these things Jehovah's way. Would he keep God's commandments in God's way? When returning to God's favor, this is the lesson. Make sure we want to do things God's way and not our way. So often, brothers who make a mistake come before the bodies of elders, and they begin to lay down their own way of returning back to God, instead of listening to what the elders are telling them and setting their path straight so they can have a relationship with Jehovah that refers their own understanding to that of Jehovah's. If we're called on to go down and bathe ourselves in the Jordan River 7 times, even though there are cleaner waters nearby home, what are we going to do? Are we going to listen to Jehovah, go down there to the Jordan River and dip 7 times, even though we think those waters are filthy? But if this be God's commandment, will we do it? Are we willing to do things God's way? There should be no scheming on our part, no shortcuts. Our love is to reveal, or be revealed in this, as John says, that we should keep God's commandments His way. King David went to this Jebusite named Araunah. Now this was a switch. Can you imagine a king going to a commoner instead of a commoner going to the king? Now this Araunah was not a Jew, he was a foreigner, and the Jews in fact were under strict orders to devote the Jebusites to total destruction and to leave no breathing thing among them. Yet David went to this farmer Jebusite and bargained with him for an altar site. This was unheard of in Israel. When the Jebusite farmer saw King David coming, what did he do? He bowed down low to the ground and generously offered to give David not only the threshing floor or the altar site, but he says, I'll give you the cattle for the burnt offering, the threshing sled, and the implements of the cattle for the wood. Everything, he says, I am willing to give you for nothing. It's all yours. Take it. Offer it to your God, Jehovah. It costs you absolutely nothing. Now, can you see the test here? What an opportunity. What a temptation to get something for nothing. This man, David's a Jew. Getting things for nothing. That phrase is not a simple thing. They have a history this way. They're marvelous people in business. But Jehovah knew this too. How would this man react now? Would he do this my way or would he not? This Jebusite was a heathen, devoted to God to death. Why should the king want to hear or even pay this man anything? But David was smart enough to know. But before he could annihilate this man, he himself would have to inquire of Jehovah whether it be proper or not. And David did not want to approach Jehovah because he was not in a good relationship with him. So David could not ask Jehovah this. Now remember, God was testing David's heart. David had just committed a very serious sin, and now he wants to get back into God's favor. Was he worthy or unworthy? This is the point. We notice that Jehovah does this from time to time, and perhaps it would be good for some of our elders to realize this. Because Jehovah might very well test our hearts to find out where we stand in relationship with him. In 2 Chronicles 32:31, it tells us that Jehovah put Hezekiah to a test on one occasion. And it says there to find out everything that is in his heart. And evidently Jehovah did this in a very simple way. He withdrew his spirit from Hezekiah. And Hezekiah was on his own strength now. Would Hezekiah trusted Jehovah from the knowledge that he had and the experience that he had in dealing with Jehovah. King Saul, we read of him at 1 Samuel 13:8-14. There we see his foolishness, his lack of appreciation for Jehovah's arrangement, his wrong heart motives. And he was punished for this. Jehovah tested his heart. Saul failed in the test. Samuel said to obey is better than to sacrifice. Sacrifices mean little or nothing without obedience. We have to be in full harmony with Jehovah's will if we want to offer up sacrifices to our God and have those sacrifices accepted. David, without doubt, was grateful to the Jebusite, but David wisely refused the offer. No, David says, I will buy it for you, or buy it of you at a price, and not offer my God Jehovah burnt offerings that cost me nothing. Accordingly, David bought the threshing floor and the cattle for 50 silver shekels. 2 Samuel 24:24. And then at 2 Samuel 24:25, we read, and David proceeded to build there an altar to Jehovah and offer up burnt sacrifices and communion sacrifices. And Jehovah began letting himself be entreated for the land, so that the scourge was halted from upon Israel. David did things God's way. He obeyed, and Jehovah lifted the scourge. David, by obeying or buying the property and offering the sacrifices which cost him nothing, proved that his heart was right with Jehovah. His sacrifices had value because he was willing to pay for it. It cost him something, and so Jehovah thereby accepted that sacrifice and stopped the pestilence. So our sixth lesson is this. When we come before Jehovah our God, we should not want to come empty-handed or with gifts that cost us nothing. Our sacrifices should reflect the depth of our devotion to our God, our relationship with Him. And that is why Abel's sacrifice was more pleasing to Jehovah than Cain's. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 16, verse 16, Exodus 23:15 and 34:20, we read there, all who come before Jehovah must come not with empty hands. We're told to bring our very best, the very first fruits of the land, of our possessions. In a moment of weakness, we might rationalize. We might say to ourselves, Jehovah doesn't mind. We can cheat a little here and there. It's not all that serious. But the lesson here is that it does matter, that God does care. And as the Watchtower recently put it, that you cannot thumb your nose at God and get away with it. You have to take Jehovah's commandments very seriously. Had David not paid for the property or the cattle, his sacrifice would have been meaningless. It would have been an insult to Jehovah, and no doubt the scourge would not have been halted on Israel. So we want to worship Jehovah the right way. It is critically important to our salvation. It means our life. Lesson 7 is our dedications today are literally sacrifices to God. Now here we are today about to dedicate this building, this kingdom hall, to the glory of God. And because we worked so hard on this building, and because it has cost us plenty financially too, by the looks of things, it represents a sacrifice. And believe me, if I know anything about building kingdom halls, some of you have given out of your want. You've given out of your own energy when you didn't have it to give. And you gave it out of your time when there was no time for you to give. You gave at a time when, I understand, it rained. It was quite miserable. And you came anyway. This building was built. And don't think that this has gone unnoticed by Jehovah. Our dedications actually are such that once we make them, we restrict the use of our building solely to kingdom interests. God does not command us to dedicate this building to Him. There's no commandment in the Bible that says that we should dedicate kingdom halls. We are going to do this primarily and wholly and solely out of our free will. We want to do this, and that is what makes it beautiful. It's a free will offering on our part. It is a gift from us to God. So what we're doing here this evening is a very beautiful thing in the eyes of God when you stop to think of it, because we're saying in essence everything that goes on from now on in this building has to reflect the glory of God, or else it will not be tolerated in this building. Lesson 8 is, this hall, by its very beauty, tells others that we hold the worship of Jehovah very dear to us. We didn't have to make it this beautiful. We could have made it a shack and just put it, this piece together. Lo and behold, we used to be able to meet in upstairs in the buildings and down in basements and barns. In Oddfellows Hall, I remember down in Los Angeles, California, I used to meet in Oddfellows Hall. We went in there and we had to chase the demons out of that place before we held our meetings in that. It stank with cigarettes and cigar butts. We brought our own chairs and it was a miserable place to try to worship Jehovah. So, having a building like this and dedicating it to the glory of God is something real nice. When the Jews and others looked at Solomon's temple, they knew instantly that whoever built that house must have loved Jehovah very much, because they could tell that those builders held nothing back from making it a building that reflected to the glory of Jehovah. People could see that not only was lovely timber used, but even pure gold and silver was not held back. The builders gave their all so that Jehovah would be praised. So beauty serves a purpose. It tells others how we feel about our God and about our worship of Him, and to what extent we're willing to sacrifice to our God. You'll find that brothers traveling down the highways here, they look and they see that sign that says Kingdom Hall, and immediately it registers a change in their thinking. How often we have traveled down the highways, we saw signs that said Kingdom Hall, we pulled off to the side of the road, turned around, went back, looked into the windows, tried all the doors to see whether the hall was opened or not. And if there was somebody there, we literally thanked God when we could get inside and just to see and get the feel of the place, because we realized that this building is a building dedicated to Jehovah's praise. However, physical beauty is not everything. Here in our Kingdom Hall, we must learn to see the unseen, to live the life of faith. We need to learn to walk by faith and not by sight. Beauty is very costly to have and to hold, brothers. You will learn that, because maintenance costs almost as much as the building itself. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18 tells us this: for the things seen are temporary, but the things unseen are everlasting. Beauty in itself has limited value. Paul urges us to keep our eyes fixed on things above. That is what we must learn to do when we come to the Kingdom Hall here. Jesus said simply this. He says the flesh or the physical thing is of no use at all. It is the Spirit that is life-giving. And these words that I say unto you, they are spirit and they are life. What if you spent your whole life devoted to attaining physical things, the most beautiful house, furnishing it with the best that there is to furnish, and yet one day if you were to wake up blind, what good would all of that be to you? You couldn't see it. But if you filled your heart with things devoted to God, filled that heart with the fruitages of God's Spirit, made over your personality to the praise of Jehovah, even though you could not see with your physical eye, your spiritual eye would be able to see. And that is why Jesus said, when the eye of the mind is dark, oh, how dark that darkness is. And that is the problem of the world today. They do not have spiritual eyes, but physical eyes, and they're darkened because of that. This building, because although beautiful, In it we want to do more than simply have it reflect physical beauty. We want it to serve a greater and grander and more honorable purpose, which is spiritual. We want it to glorify our God Jehovah. We want it to shield us, of course, from the rain and the cold. We want it to be a meeting place where we might learn of our God and sing praises to His name. We want the people that come here receive instruction and counsel in the Word of God. We want that this attractive building help us to see that we are a family of God's people, one family, a world association of people dedicated to praise one God, Jehovah. Coming under one roof helps us to feel united with the rest of God's people earthwide, as the Apostle Peter tells us in the book of Peter, 1 Peter 2:17 and 1 Peter 5:9. We share common worship under this one roof, a worship that is supported by the Word of God. So when we come here, we want our people, those people that come here, to hear music that praises God, that honors Him. When they hear songs sung here, let those songs tell about Jehovah's greatness and of His kingdom and of our responsibility to our God. When they hear prayers said here, let those prayers be the type of prayers that we can join in and say amen to. We listen to the Bible read here. We hear experiences from the field. We receive instruction in truth, justice, and righteousness. We come here to be able to change over our personality and put that mark in our forehead to being Christian witnesses of our God Jehovah. We want our building to serve an honorable purpose. It is a unique building in the community. There is no others like it, unless, of course, it is another kingdom hall or an assembly hall. People passing by will say, there is where Jehovah's Witnesses meet, and thus the building will give a witness in itself, and in its own silent way reflect glory to our God Jehovah. Now, as important as this building is, it is not to be compared to the building and renovating program that goes on inside of us when we come to this building. David had to change his heart, and we too, coming here, we must have our hearts worked upon. In fact, the Apostle Paul says, circumcise your heart, so that the truth of God's word can sink in, that you may become believers of the Word of God. Inside this building, we want to teach people how to bring their lives in line with the will of Jehovah, so that they can worship Jehovah in spirit and in truth. John said, Jehovah is searching for such kind they might worship Him. The Apostle Paul tells us at 1 Corinthians 3:10-17 that he had laid the foundation, but someone else is building on it. But let each one keep watching how he is building on it, but no man can lay another foundation than what is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation, gold, silver, precious stone, wood, materials, hay, stubble, each one's work will be made manifest, for the day will show it up. So our teaching must be pure, pure as gold, righteous and true as silver, and as precious stone. And in Ephesians 4:22, there the Apostle Paul tells us to put away the old personality and put on the new personality, which was created according to God's will in true righteousness and life. The effort we put forth to accomplish this change in our lives represents a sacrifice. In the book of Romans, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, we read, consequently, I entreat you by the compassions of God, brothers, to present your bodies a sacrifice, living, holy, acceptable to God, a sacred service with your power of reason, and quit being fashioned after the system of things, but be transformed by making your mind over, that you may prove to yourself the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And this is what goes on, or should go on, in this kingdom hall. So our whole dedicated life represents a sacrifice to our God, and we learn how to do that in our meeting places. As a rule, this word sacrifice is not light. It has a harsh sound to it. It generally means giving up things that are dear, and the vast majority of people do not want to do that. But the word sacrifice is a beautiful word. It is one of the most beautiful words in the Bible. It really means making something sacred. That is what the word sacrifice means. So when we sacrifice to our God, or offer something in the spirit of sacrifice, we are in substance clothing the object with special endearment. We make it sacred, as it were, by the spirit we show, because our spirit or attitude adorns our gestures. That is what makes our gifts beautiful to God. For example, in our field ministry, we offer our time, we offer our money, sometimes our very health, our very energy when we go out in service. Our very thoughts and prayers to Jehovah all become a sacrifice unto our God. Jehovah knows this. He knows that we could be doing other things with our life. But no, we are spending ourselves to do this to our God because we love Him. We are in substance sacrificing to Him. This living sacrifice draws us closer to Jehovah. It also endears Him to us. We become precious in His sight. Our effort is held sacred because all of this is the right use of His Spirit. And Paul says, present your body as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to our God Jehovah. Here at our kingdom hall, brothers, we should learn the true meaning of sacrifice and what sort of sacrifices bring joy to our God. In the book of Psalms, 5th verse 14, there we read, offer thanksgiving as your sacrifice to your God and pay the Most High your vows. So thanksgiving to God becomes a sacrifice to our God. Dedication, we learned just recently, is a vow. And that vow, when fulfilled, is a sacrifice unto our God. Psalm 50 verse 23 said, the one offering thanksgiving as his sacrifice is the one that glorifies me. So when we're thankful at heart, we glorify God. In fact, in the book of Philippians, it says that before you even pray or serve Jehovah, you should render your prayers in thanksgiving. Instead of finding complaints to God or always declaring unto our God the hardships, find something, first of all, to be thankful for. You have life. Who knows? You've got a lot of good friends. You know the truth. So express thanks first and then go to Him with your problems. Being appreciative people, grateful, thankful for our lot in life is one way we can sacrifice unto our God. And this is what we learn here at our kingdom hall. We should learn how to be grateful, how to be thankful to our God. Psalm 51, verses spirit. A heart broken and crushed, O God, you will not despise. So when you come to Jehovah, it's good to come with humble hearts to our God, pleading with Him, because all of us have need of forgiveness. We want a better world, brothers. We have brothers that are sick, brothers that are in need. There are so many things that we should be praying for, so in all humility we should come to our God. A heart broken and crushed, O God, will not despise. In that case, bulls will be offered up on your very own altar. So in these scriptures we learn that here in our kingdom homes, we must learn or come to realize that our sacrifices to God mean little or nothing unless our lives are brought in line with the will of God. We must have our lives in line with Jehovah's will. Then we can read what Hebrews 13:15-16 tells us. Through Jesus Christ, let us always offer to God a sacrifice of praise. Notice how many times that is said. Praising God, thanking God. And that this is a sacrifice. The fruit of the lips which make public declaration to his name. Moreover, do not forget the doing of good and the sharing of things with others, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. So the offering of what we have to others is a sacrifice. And what a wonderful thing then it is for us to have this hall and the things that go on in this hall to bring in line, to bring these things in line with the will of God. So what is truly important here is not so much the physical building, but the people, and those people in whom God's Spirit dwells. Knowing what sacrifice means, we should not hesitate, therefore, to call upon our dear brothers to make sacrifices. So often we hesitate to do this, brothers, because we think it presents a hardship upon those upon whom we call for them to make sacrifices. Sometimes we have Bible studies. We tell them that everything is free in the kingdom hall. And that is not so. We're afraid if we call upon them to make sacrifices that they might turn away from the kingdom hall. But sacrifices is a proof of their heart condition, of their motive, of their genuineness. They must look inside themselves and want to know how much they themselves are willing to give in behalf of the worship of Jehovah. And we should be asking ourselves the same thing, because that is how they're going to learn unselfishness. By what we sacrifice, we learn to be unselfish. By when we're disciplined, we learn righteousness. That's what the Apostle Paul said. But when we sacrifice in behalf of one another, we learn to love one another. That is how they're going to learn to trust in Jehovah with all their hearts and not to lean upon their own understanding if we call upon them to sacrifice unto God. What we have of material substance is truthfully not ours. Let's be honest, when we came into the earth, we brought nothing with us. All of us, without exception, came naked into this world. Why then should we hesitate to give it back to God? It belongs to Him in the first place. Because somehow we get attached to what we have. Giving unselfishly teaches us reliance on Jehovah, brothers. We've got to teach ourselves that. And we've got to teach ourselves to be willing to give it up. Because someday we might have to do that. In African lands, this has been a great test for homes. The brothers had to leave their homes behind, and they were burned, bombed out, destroyed. And the brothers have been helped to build new homes. There are ample opportunities for every one of us to offer sacrifices to God in different ways. Every time we come to the Kingdom Hall, we should come to the Kingdom Hall with this in mind, to give a gift in some way, whatever way that might be. We can give our undivided attention, first of all. Sometimes we might be very tired, exhausted. We worked all day, and I sit there too, just as you do, and I know there are times when you wrestle to keep yourself awake and attentive. Well, let's work at that. Give of ourselves. speakers can give of themselves too in the way they prepare for their assembly parts. And they do. It's not an easy thing to get on the platform. You can ask any sister, sometimes you think it's easy until you get up here and you begin to realize that not all of us have been carved out to stand before people and to express ourselves. Most of us are very modest people, and we need to be trained and educated, and we've got to have a lot of strength in us to get up here and to be to offer ourselves in this way. And so it's a great sacrifice. I see in our Kingdom Hall these dear sisters that could not so much as say one coherent sentence. And through the Kingdom Ministry School, and by the help of the brothers, in their way come up on the platform. And believe me, we sit in the audience and we praise God that this sister has the courage to come up here and to give a kingdom message. And little boy, this past Wednesday, in our service meeting in the school, he had a part in the school. He is grown now that he doesn't have to stand on a bunch of little currents so he can talk into the mic. It's a beautiful thing to see this lad get up there and to express himself. He's giving of himself. He's making a sacrifice unto his God, Jehovah, even though he may not think so at the present time. But all of us can do that. The way we prepare our programs. And two, there are contribution boxes here, brothers. And it's not ridiculous to offer unto our God something. We can be as that little widow woman. We may not have much to give, but all of us, believe me, there is not an exception here that can imitate that woman. And I say that with all sincerity because I think when Jesus stood there in that temple of Jerusalem, he noticed something which was very, very unusual, because the rich have a way of knowing how to do these things. They know how to draw attention unto themselves and to make their contributions stretch. And they get praises for it. And you will sometimes wish that you could have the same finesse that they did. But Jesus noted this woman, and this woman, no doubt, was even ashamed to think that we just sometimes like we ourselves, we don't have much. We wish that there's some paper on the bottom of that box so it doesn't make noise when we drop it in. And so we're just a little backward on some of those things. But if this is what we can do it, let's do it out of a ready heart and the fullness of heart. There are other things that we can do, brothers. Every time we come to our Kingdom Hall, you'll notice in this Kingdom Hall, it'll take an awful lot of care. Your landscaping will take care. You take your bathrooms. Somehow, bathrooms deteriorate faster than any part of the Kingdom Hall. And no one wants to go in there and do the job of really maintaining it. But brothers, let's not be afraid of the bathrooms, And really, let's pause our hearts to really see that our bathrooms are clean and neat and reflect the glory of our God, Jehovah, that we are clean people and the neat people. And to you, as a brand new Kingdom Hall, it's beautiful to behold and nice to see and a blessing to be here, believe me. But as time goes on, we want to keep it this way. Ross, take off paper off the floor. Solicit the children to do that. Get your chairs straight. You see newcomers coming into the Kingdom Hall. Give of yourself. Go up to them. Introduce yourself. My name is so-and-so. Glad to have you here. And give of yourself a little bit, because all of this represents a sacrifice unto our God, Jehovah. There are literally hundreds of things that we can do to help, to give. And that represents a sacrifice. So you want to remember the widow woman. Remember David. I will not offer to my God Jehovah sacrifices that cost me nothing. Isn't that beautiful, brother? If you look inside of yourself, and if you can say that to yourself, you'll be able to identify a good heart in you. So when you come to Jehovah, you can say, Jehovah, it'll cost me, but I love it. Because this is the truth. I want to be part of your organization, and I want to live eternally in your kingdom or under your kingdom to praise you all day. So, brothers, remember this, and draw close to one another, and draw close to our God, Jehovah. Now we've come to the time when we're going to dedicate this kingdom of Hall to Jehovah's glory and praise by means of prayer to our God. But before we do that, we'd like to draw all of you into this dedication program. And the way we'd like to do that is have a motion made. Is there anyone here who would like to make a motion that this kingdom hall be dedicated to the glory of God? Bob, would you come? Or Ray, would you rise?
I move that this kingdom hall be dedicated to Jehovah's honor and glory and to the furtherance of his kingdom interest in the earth, and that this hall be used exclusively for his divine purpose.
Is there anyone here that would like to second the motion? Brother Dross?
I second the motion.
Are we in agreement with this?
Yes.